5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if maybe the telecom companies could tell us where that hunting camp was. We could. I'm kidding. I'm just picking on you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Otwell, I read your testimony, and one of the one issue I take it with it is that you say we're paying more for the same level of service. I would suggest we're paying level and not paying more and not getting the same level of service in rural America. I live in a little town of Chula, Georgia, in between Tifton and Ashburn, and while certainly Ashburn has had its challenges with internet services, Tifton being a little larger has done better, but you get into those small towns that even are pretty close to larger areas, our service is subpar at best. And it was interesting that my neighbor decided to try a different route because they were so they weren't satisfied with what they currently had, and so when they tried that different route and the different route didn't work, then they had to go back into a waiting list to even get back on the internet service that they had before, which again was a little slow. I appreciate you mentioning ComSouth and Hawkinsville in my district. They're a great company. I want to mention one of the things that has become a concern to us in Georgia with a different carrier up in the northern part of the state is that they take money to expand the networks, but it's the CAF funds, I believe, is that correct, where they're actually supposed to, or maybe those funds are being taken and not being used for the proper purposes and maybe being diverted to other projects. What type of accountability measures would you suggest so that we make sure that the money that is going, that we as Congress put into expanding access actually gets used for access instead of supplanting funds that the companies would have put into those areas?
That's a great question, Congressman. I appreciate that. So whenever we talk about the small company, the rural community-based carrier, Universal Service Fund, some of our reforms have recently been updated for more accountability. For example, all companies, no matter which model or which regulation path you took, every year we have to report geocoded locations to all the locations we build broadband to. And if you're in that model-based path, we actually even have to report locations we previously have built to. So at the end of that 10-year period, the FCC will have a geocoded map of every single place that we have broadband service. We also are not receiving support in certain census blocks. So census blocks that are deemed either too low cost for the high cost area or have a competitor already serving without support, those blocks are not eligible for support. So our system really has been built to only put the money where it is desperately needed and to enforce build-out requirements in those areas.
So you mentioned one thing that I think we need to revisit, and that is competitor. It seems to me that one of the problems is that once someone receives a grant for an area, if they're not doing a good job in that area, nobody else is eligible for a grant in that area when maybe they would do a better job for the people. That's
not untrue. And what you're mostly talking about there are areas that we call the
It is or it's not true? It is true or it's not true?
The others may not be eligible?
That's right.
You're correct about that. Those are what are in the price cap area, so that's your larger providers usually. There are lots of rural areas that they cover that there is not as much accountability for.
So in an area where, say, Windstream had taken a grant to expand access but maybe did not do what we expected them to do with the grant, we could not, because of the way the current law is written, you can't turn around and support somebody else that may come in and do what the funds were intended for.
So for example, a company like mine, we could not come in and receive funding for that area. Most of these areas are your higher cost areas with fewer consumers, and so without that ongoing support, there's really not a business case for one network, much less two. So we do try to not be inefficient in our building and using funds in the same area, but that is an issue.
But my concern is where we have allocated federal money to expand it, it's not being used by the company as we intended for it to, but then we can't help somebody who actually would compete with them.
Now, there is an option. In some of the latest reforms, some of those companies can turn in some of their areas that they're not serving, and there is an auction process.
We're going to have to, they're not going to voluntarily turn in those areas. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, but I hope that we'll continue to look at that area because a lot of money's being taken and then not used for the purpose that it was intended for.